Welcome to Double Overtime, Ultra Professional Ultimate League podcast. Your home for everything Premier Ultimate League and Western Ultimate League. I'm Jenna Weiner. He's Sascha Vogel. Sascha, very excited to be here with you to talk some professional ultimate on Double Overtime, Ultra World's newest podcast. It's going to be fun. We have a lot to talk about today. Lots of ultimate happening in both leagues. And first episode, we got to do a bit of our, Western Ultimate League first half of the season review and get our slightly belated Premier Ultimate League preview. Give some of our picks for the championship weekends. We'll give our picks for next weekend's games. Before we do any of that, let's talk a little basketball, shall we? The college basketball championships happened earlier this week, both men's and women's March Madness wrapping up. South Carolina Gamecocks taking down the UConn Huskies on the women's side, and on the men's side, Kansas Jayhawks mounting an incredible comeback against the UNC Tar Heels. Sascha, basketball was fun to watch. Both of those games very entertaining.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to watch. Really cool to see the hometown team, the South Carolina, win the championship. Breaking that epic, UConn run in championships. I think that's pretty cool. And it was a great game. And as well as on the men's side, great game, a lot of fun to watch. I thought, I really thought Kansas was out of it after the first half, but they showed resilience and came back and won it.
Yeah, huge comeback by the Jayhawks, down 15 at halftime. What would be comparable for that in Ultimate? I mean, I feel like the Fury comeback over Riot all those years ago has probably got to be a bigger comeback respectively. So maybe you're thinking I guess if we're thinking USA Ultimate halftime rule, something like an 8-3, 8-4, maybe halftime deficit being made up in the second half. Something like that.
Yeah, definitely. That's it's a lot to overcome, and definitely the Fury Riot game 100% came to mind as soon as you started talking about it, and I was like, oh yeah, that one.
Yeah, an all-time classic, that's for sure. On the women's side, I will admit I tend to pay more attention to the women's side of things than the men's side of things. That's why I'm on this podcast with you talking PUL versus AUDL. South Carolina, very impressive. Your current home state team, Don Staley, now moving to an undefeated 2-0 in championship games while knocking Gina Auriemma, the UConn coach, down from 11-0 to 11-1. Leah Boston, yet another double-double for the National Player of the Year from South Carolina. And you'd love to see it in these type of situations. Destiny Henderson, a career-high 26 points for the Gamecocks. If you're going to play your best, might as well do it in the championship. Help carry your team to a title, I think 5 years removed from their title in 2017.
Yeah, for sure. I believe she's a senior as well. So, what better time to do it than her very, very last game that she's going to be playing at South Carolina.
Absolutely. So that's some basketball. Let's talk some Ultimate, shall we? Move on.
Let's
talk about the games that happened this past weekend in both the Western Ultimate League and the Premier Ultimate League. Let's focus in on the Western Ultimate League to start on this podcast that we now have. Both leagues are playing. We're going to be bouncing back and forth between the two this week. Let's start with the Western Ultimate League. Utah Wild not playing this weekend, although being repped on the show for those of you watching on YouTube. They'll be in action next weekend. But the games that we did have were San Francisco Falcons playing at the San Diego Super Bloom. In overtime, single overtime, not double overtime, San Diego takes the win 15-14 over San Francisco. And in the other game, Oregon Onyx winning at home 18-14 over the Arizona Sidewinders gives them a winning 2-1 record so far on the season. Sascha, which of those two games particularly stood out to you? Probably the overtime game between San Francisco, San Diego, although the Oregon and Arizona game, no slouch either.
Yeah, I know that San Francisco and Super Bowl. The Falcons were down, I believe, 12-7 at the beginning of. I can't remember which quarter, but they were down 12-7 at some point and came back and ended up tying it. We're talking about comebacks. That's a pretty significant comeback.
Absolutely. Yeah, big comeback, and they took a lead 14-13 in the dying moments of the fourth quarter. San Diego able to tie it up, though. Alex Diaz, former UC San Diego player, just absolutely incredible, dominating, going not quite every other, but being an absolute monster for the Super Bloom. And in overtime, got the final assist to Kristen Pajunas for the win. Interesting thing, I will say, with the Western Ultimate League, in every quarter, including overtime, the team that has possession when the clock hits zeros is allowed to maintain the possession or until there's a turnover. Or in the situation we saw, interestingly, they just had to play keep away to beat San Francisco. Not something you usually see in most other sports.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely adds a wrinkle to to the sport, where you have to pay attention to the time rather than just what the score is, because you could get down into a situation near the end and you got to play possession ball. You can't just be throwing 50-50 hucks to the end zone during that time when you're tied, because you want to have the disc at the end of the quarter, so you're the only one that has a chance to score.
Yeah, absolutely. I know because I think too the USA Ultimate rules, the rules that most of these athletes are accustomed to playing to. There's been quite a bit of conversation over the years about should you have to score to win, the hard cap enforcing that games just over regardless of where you're at versus soft cap having to score to win to one extent or another. This feels more like a hard cap just because it is, you don't technically have to score to win, weirdly, if you're up and you have possession, like we saw with the Super Bloom. You're up by one, you don't turn it over. The other team just doesn't get a chance to respond. I have to say, I appreciate it because to an extent, it is just you're trying to avoid those more dangerous jump balls, those hospital passes that you might otherwise see in got to put it up at the buzzer beater sorts of situations. But I was also sitting watching the game and thinking, what can the Falcons actually do besides just getting super aggressive and fouling the crap out of the San Diego players? Because how else do you get the disc back in that situation? It just presents an interesting thing of where are the incentives for a dangerous player, not for dangerous play? I think possession at the end, of course, feels like the right thing overall, or it certainly seems to have worked so far in the first half of the Western Ultimate League season. But it's a little bit tricky in those situations where San Diego just played keep away, and there was almost nothing the Falcons seemed to be able to do about it.
Yeah, for sure. I think a little more aggressive, I guess. Yeah, I think a little more aggressive defense will help, but obviously we want to be as safe as we possibly can. And playing keep away is, I mean, it's a lot easier in this game. The ultimate is built off of the offense doing things. um, the offense has so much more advantage than the defense in this game.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that point, this is not just San Francisco had no opportunities to tie it up, to you know make it not be that possession finish that we saw. They had the disc with like a minute and a half left, turned it over. Jesse O'Connor, who was great for them all game, tried to hit Gembosini, going deep, unable to connect, and San Diego's like, cool, we'll just do that. And it's something where, maybe we'll see, maybe we won't. I'm not sure. Changes in how coaches and work with their players, especially shifting from a more USA Ultimate mindset to a Western Ultimate League mindset, possession-based game. You trust O'Connor in that instance to hit that deep shot most of the time. Bozzini had a step. And do you risk when you're down one, giving a possession with 30 seconds to go? It's hard to say. And I think it's a growing edge for a league that is in its first full season.
Yeah, for sure. And we just gotta get used to it. It's a little different rule set, and we're not used to seeing it or playing it, and so I think we'll slowly get to see more and more throughout even this season how teams are going to be playing the end of quarter, end of game situations.
Yeah, it's going to be something that's interesting to watch. No overtime needed in the other Western Ultimate League game this past weekend, though. Oregon Onyx exploding out to a significant lead at home over the Arizona Sidewinders and basically just maintained that lead at one point early on in that game, up 5-1. Were the hosts, and the game finished at 18-14, so basically the same margin all the way throughout. Few highlight players for the Onyx. Again, this is a team folks don't know, which if you don't know, now you will. The Onyx did not exist as of 6 months ago, really. They came into being in partnership with the AUDL, the new AUDL team that's based out of Oregon, the Nitro, and have come on the scene and already have 2 wins, 2-1 winning record, and bring in a host of talent from the Oregon Ultimate scene. JC Jones with now second highlight play of the week, back-to-back weeks. Morgan Zajon with 4 goals for the Onyx. And Oregon not even playing with Ali Steinfeld out this week. Still getting the win at home. Pretty good showing so far from the debutantes.
Yeah, they're looking great. I know that a lot of the team is from that Oregon Schwa club team, so they've got that cohesion and that chemistry together already. And I'd assume that they're playing similarly to how they would play in the club season, and it seems to be working out well for them.
So far, so good for the Onyx. First loss on the road, away to San Francisco, 2 home wins. In a situation where you have 7 teams in the league, 4 of which go to the championship weekend, you'd think that probably a 3-3 record will get you there, which puts the Onyx in pretty good position. Touching back briefly on San Francisco, it's a favorite for a lot of folks coming into the season to make that championship weekend. Currently sitting at 1-3, probably going to have to win out only one more home game. It's going to be tough, I think, for the Falcons. Hard to say what has gone wrong, and maybe they'll still prove us wrong. Maybe they'll make championship weekend win out, but it's been a bit surprising, not necessarily the results you'd expect from both Oregon and San Francisco initially this season.
Yeah. I think that for San Francisco, they just gotta finish the games, gotta win the games, and in order to try to make it to championship weekend, they gotta win out. They've got to go all in on all the games that they have left and go through it. Oregon is looking great. They're in a great position. They're in number 2 right now in the division or in the league. Yeah, number 2. And yeah, just keep doing what they're doing.
Yeah, Oregon second in the standings at the moment. For the other team that we haven't really talked about yet, Arizona Sidewinders, they are the only other team alongside San Francisco to have played already 2/3 of their schedule. Currently sitting at 2-2. We got 2-1 in that Arizona homestand. The Sidewinders, you think they'd be in a relatively comfortable position? This is a team that spawned a number of different players from even outside of the Arizona Ultimate scene, most notably, I would say, probably Aubrey Dietrich, out of the Colorado area. At least that's where she's primarily played her club ultimate with Fort Collins Shame. Dietrich looks pretty good, pretty dynamic cutter as we've seen in the club division. Good pickup for Arizona, and you probably have to feel pretty good about their chances looking towards the second half of the season, their last couple of games of the season.
Yeah, Aubrey Dietrich she's fast. She's very fast. She got 3 goals this game against the Onyx, and most of them she was pretty wide open for those goals. When she has separation, it's over. It's over for you. And for the team as a whole, Arizona is the team that has surprised me the most out of everybody, because when you think of Arizona Ultimate, you don't really think of all of these high level players, but they made some noise at Winter Cup. They're sitting 2-2 right now, and third in the standings for the league. With the rise of Lawless in the club division as well, they Arizona's got players. Arizona's got the people to you know you know probably make it to championship weekend. They look good.
They look legit, and again, as you mentioned, as we saw at Winter Cup, Cody Lippincott getting on Sports Center with those incredible grabs, and the thrower of at least one of those goals, Jay McLaughlin, getting on the board in this past game against the Onyx with 4 goals as well. So I'd say Onyx, Arizona looking pretty solid heading in towards championship weekend, both of them having played at least half of their games, if not 4 out of 6 for Arizona. For San Francisco and for San Diego, things are a little bit murkier. San Diego at least has their homestand to come, them alongside the Utah Wild, not playing this past weekend, but currently repped on the show, playing this upcoming weekend in Los Angeles against the LA Astra. Those 2 teams, I think, along with the Astra, be interesting to see how they perform going forward with the Southern California and Utah homestands. See how it shakes out. Seattle currently sitting top of the standings. Sascha, for Fan Fantasy, it's you topping the standings this past week. How'd you do it?
Well, I'm not going to give away my secrets, but I can give tips, and my tip is look at the stats. I guess that's my secret. I look at stats, and I just see what people have done in the past, and how consistent they are in doing those things, and it worked out.
Good win. Hey, you take it. It's fun to see that we're getting some more fantasy. Obviously, the AUDL has been doing it in one form or another for a little bit. It's very cool to see the Western Ultimate League trying it on for themselves in their own way. All right, let's pivot now to the Premier Ultimate League. Premier Ultimate League just starting their 2022 season this past weekend with a pair of games of their own. Let's start with the reigning East champions, the Raleigh Radiants, demolishing the Atlanta Soul in Atlanta 28-13. Atlanta didn't play in 2021. The Radiants just loaded in that North Carolina ultimate scene and even picking up players like now Team USA World Games team member Sarah Meckstroth. It was kind of close to start, and then the Radiants ran away with it, and it was not close from there. Sascha, who do you think this game reflects more of who they truly are? Either Radiants and how good they are, or an Atlanta Soul team that we might continue to see struggle the rest of the season?
Honestly, I believe it's both. Um, we all know North Carolina Ultimate. It's apparently North Carolina is the mecca of Ultimate at this point. Um, they've churned out some incredible players over the years, and obviously we've got there's a lot of national championships coming from them over the past year or so, and yeah, they're very good. And then on the Atlanta side, they've been struggling for a while. Just Atlanta Ultimate in general has kind of been struggling for a while. They lose people to that aren't playing anymore, at least competitively. They or people that have moved away to other areas, and I don't know. It's it might just be rebuilding years for Atlanta. It happens in a lot of teams, a lot of professional leagues.
Yeah, the Radiant's off to a fantastic start. It's something that'll be interesting to see, in particular for the other teams that didn't end up playing in 2021, Nashville Nightshade and Minnesota Strike, to see how they come out with their showings, Nashville in action, next weekend. So it'll be interesting to see if Nashville can make a different showing than Atlanta, say, and Raleigh playing again this coming weekend against DC Shadow. Can they keep a momentum against a also very loaded DC Shadow roster? That game will be absolutely fun to watch. We'll be excited to talk about and break down. Let's move to the final game of the weekend. Not final chronologically, but final for this segment. Milwaukee Monarchs taking on the Columbus Pride. And Sascha, with the Monarchs, we can't not talk about the off-field issues, the allegations of sexual assault against someone who was potentially, but was never rostered on the Monarchs. The discussions about what the Monarchs and what the Premier Ultimate League could have or should have done, and who knew what when, and who some of the different players were, both in terms of the actual Monarchs players and also the captains and Monarch leadership who were navigating this whole situation. There's a really great article on Ultraworld written by Mags Colvette that we encourage folks to go and read to learn more about that situation more in depth. Some really great reporting from Mags as they broke down the story, talked to a lot of folks, got the inside scoop. For this game, how that ended up showing up was more in the very first point, where we saw Columbus pull the disc to Milwaukee. Milwaukee intentionally dropping the pull and walking off the field to give up their very first hold of the 2022 season, which we learned later was done intentionally at the request of the sexual assault victims, of the survivors, around this situation around the Monarchs. Sascha, any thoughts on how that went down, the significance of the Monarchs giving up their first offensive opportunity out of respect and at the request of the survivors who were involved in this whole situation?
Yeah, it's difficult for me to say. And that's because I am a man. I am not a sexual assault survivor either. Um, so I feel like there's nothing I can say about it. Yeah.
Fair enough. And it's a tricky situation because when I first heard about the drop poll and the doing it in recognition of what happened, I was unsure how much of it was maybe more performative as a way for the Monarchs to be like, yeah, that happened, bad thing, oh no, and move on, and how much of it was this is a recognition on the field, a reflection of harm has happened, and we want to show that in a physical form on the field, and learning that it was specifically at the request of the survivors, I think gives it arguably far more meaning than without context and without any of the situation. this was specifically asked for. And sure, just dropping a pull, giving up a first offensive point, at least to me, doesn't feel that big. But the fact that it was specifically done at the request of the survivors, I think, makes a pretty big impact for me. My only questions are, and we may never know this, who made the decision or who asked, and sort of what was the communication? Because again, we know that there were different people involved in different ways talking about this player's potential involvement on the team that led to this whole situation. And it's interesting to sort of think about, and again, with these leagues that are professional leagues, what are the communication channels? How are the teams working and navigating these different settings? Because it's complicated at the end of the day, and trying to communicate properly or in ways that feel genuine and that recognize the legitimate harm that has been done to the survivors, I think is important. And what does it mean for a professional league, professional team to do that? Because so often, unfortunately, I think we see with a lot of leagues, pointing more at men's leagues, but also women's leagues, a lot of times these types of cases are brushed under the rug. I think it's a good step forward. I think it's a great acknowledgement, and specifically done at the request of survivors is incredible. And also, let's not have this be the only thing. Let's continue to have the conversations. And I think the Premier Ultimate League is trying to do, and the Monarchs are trying to do that. It's tough. It's a tough situation. It's good to see that it was recognized on the field in action as well.
For sure. Yeah, it is tough. The only thing I thought was strange to me was how we all kind of find out about it was through the Columbus Pride Twitter account. And I mean, it could have been that, nobody was, manning the Monarchs Twitter account. But I feel like it probably should have come, or there should have been a statement from them as well. But I'm obviously not there, not on the ground, don't know the whole situation with that.
Yeah, it was something we saw, and we'll talk later in the show a bit about the sort of broadcast situations and communication situations for some of the games, but sort of how they broke down in terms of what was being communicated, who was communicating it, with the Radiance and the Soul game. When we've heard that's going to be released on tape delay. Again, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the broadcast stuff later in the show. Thinking about, okay, who is sending the information out and how, because it seemed like for the Premier Ultimate League games, at least, that it was the home team accounts that were tweeting out and sharing the information. From what I saw in the game updates, it was the Atlanta Soul Twitter account and it was the Columbus Pride Twitter account, which is fine and all well. And also, you'd love to see more communication. And I think, sure, it's going to come out in tape delay. It would have been nice to also have both accounts tweeting, because team accounts tend to shout out the names of their own players more than the other team. And if both accounts are tweeting, then we have even more folks and more information about who all the impact players were from both teams. And also, again, these teams are volunteer run. There's only so many people on the ground able to be there, able to travel for these games. So it does make some sense that we're only getting information from one side or another in some of these situations.
Well said.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to be talking some broader topics. Western Ultimate League half-season review, 4 weeks down, 4 weeks to go until the championship weekend. Talk a little bit PUL season preview, give some of our picks at the end for championship weekends as well as next weekend's games. Don't go away, we'll be right back. Welcome back to Double Overtime, Ultra Professional Ultimate League podcast. Second half of the show of our very first episode. We're going to talk about the Western Ultimate League at its halfway point, 4 weeks down, 4 weeks to go before championship weekend, and give our slightly belated Premier Ultimate League season preview. 1 week of games already down, but many more weeks to go in the Premier Ultimate League. So we're going to talk about some of the teams to watch out for. And for both leagues, we'll give our end of season predictions before making our predictions for this upcoming weekend's games. So let's start as we did with the game breakdown with the Western Ultimate League. Again, with the two leagues, just a reminder, we won't always start with the Western Ultimate League. It'll depend. And especially with the Western Ultimate League already being halfway through their season, only 4 more game weeks to go before we get to championship weekend. So far, the standings, pretty interesting so far. We have a single undefeated team in Seattle Tempest, sitting pretty at 3-0 with a plus 24 point differential. Very impressive so far from the Tempest. Have the Oregon Onyx at 2-1, the only other team with a winning record at this point, and a host of teams at 500. Arizona Sidewinder, San Diego Super Bloom, and Utah Wild all even. Arizona at 2-2, while San Diego and Utah are 1-1. San Francisco, arguably one of the favorites to make the championship weekend, coming in, have already played 2/3 of their games, currently sitting at 1-3. Looking like it might be tough for San Francisco to make that final foursome. Then we have the LA Astra, only 2 games so far. Both have been on the road, but also a minus 14 point differential. It'll be interesting to see if they're able to bounce back when they are no longer having to play up in the Pacific Northwest. Sascha, great to be back with you again. Second half of our very first show. Thoughts on the Western Ultimate League standings so far, halfway through the season?
Well, it's a little surprising to me, honestly. And it kind of seems that Seattle can't be beat at this point. They're rolling. They are rolling. And I think that massive point differential, let's see. So Seattle has a 24 point differential. The next team under that is Oregon Onyx at 2. So there's 22 points that I don't think any team will be able to make that up. But yeah, I think that was mainly the big chunk of that was from that Arizona game where Seattle scored like 28 points or something like that.
It's a 26-18 win for Seattle in Arizona. They actually beat LA. They beat the Astros by, I think, 14. Looking back to get the exact score. Yeah, 13, right, 27 to 14. Seattle just putting, I think the biggest takeaway for me from looking at the Tempest scores, they put up an incredible number of points. They put up 26 and 27 against Arizona and LA respectively. Only score 15 against San Diego, but San Diego just beat San Francisco, still has their homestand to come. That may not portend so much as a drop for Seattle, but more that San Diego could be legit. And for Seattle, I don't think there's a reason why we couldn't expect them to potentially go 6-0. I think the real question for me is who fills in those other 3 spots? Oregon, debut season, first ever time this team has been playing together, 3 games so far, 2 on a record, looking good. There's a lot of games to be played. Utah, 1-1. San Diego, 1-1. They have 2/3 of their season left to go. It's going to be interesting to see as we get to the homestand weekends, the mini tournaments, as it were, in San Diego and in Utah, to see how the teams start to shake out when they have more games under their belt. Only 1 game coming up for us, week 5, week 6, 7, 8, going to be make or break for arguably the rest of the spots behind Seattle, looking like pretty clear favorites at this point.
Yeah, for sure. Seattle's, I think the biggest reason why, that Seattle and San Diego game was pretty close was defense. Both of these teams' defense is very good. And I feel like that's why Seattle was able to, score a lot of points against Arizona and against LA is because, their defense is very good. They get a lot of great layout Ds. There's some pretty cool ones recently, and they're very, very methodical on offense too. Both their offensive line and their defensive line are very methodical, working it up the field. They don't take a lot of deep shots, and while we all want to see the deep shots because that's makes the great highlight reel stuff. Seattle is very content with working it up, and they have some really good handlers to be able to work it up and and score those points.
Yeah, Seattle, the Tempest. It makes sense. It shouldn't be surprising, but I think it's notable, especially when contrasted with the San Francisco Falcons, where you're talking basketball, South Carolina Gamecocks, your current hometown team, home state team. I am based in the San Francisco Bay Area. Falcons are my hometown team, as it were. And looking at the roster going in, I know that for me, and I know a lot of folks, expected a lot out of the Falcons team. Thought the performance at the Winter Cup was a bit disappointing for them. Expected to bounce back. 3 losses so far, albeit 3 losses on the road. We'll talk about the prevalence of home cooking in a second. It just feels, though, in a league in which Seattle looks by far the clear favorite, where Oregon and Arizona already have 2 wins banked, San Francisco's probably going to have to win out. And it's not like they can't. Again, this is a very, very talented team. The Bay Area is a rich, rich talent pool. It's just kind of surprising to see so far that the Falcons just haven't been able to put it together. And it's been a little unclear why, outside of maybe starting fast and then fading towards the end in some of their games.
Yeah, and for most of the season, it does seem kind of like that. They start off really well, and then they kind of fade out towards the end. Except for this past Super Bloom game where they were, we talked about it earlier. They were down 7-12 and came back and forced that overtime. But Super Bloom ended up coming up the win in the overtime. Looking at the Falcons' schedule, they have the Tempest on April 16th, and they have LA Astra on week 8, April 29th through May 1st. I mean,
good luck against the Tempest.
Yeah, I'm like, that's tough.
And that's not in San Francisco. That's part of one of the homestands coming up. I think that's in the one that is in San Diego. Both teams will be traveling for that. Falcons maybe a designated home team. They have to check if they are in week 6. No, Falcons are designated as the away team still at Tempest. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out, unless I could be misseeing the schedule that is in Seattle, which is arguably worse for San Francisco if it's not in San Diego, if it is the San Diego homestand and the Falcons have to travel to Seattle. They could be looking at a week 8 matchup against the Astra. The Astra, if they don't pull wins together, unfortunately, that could potentially be a meaningless game, which you would hate to see it in the first season, a meaningless game in the final week. But it's possible if the Falcons don't get a win against Seattle and if LA isn't able to bounce back. Both of those teams sitting bottom of the standings right now. It's tough, but this is the level of competition that we see in the Western ultimately that we've come to expect. And sometimes that throws you for a loop, throws you some surprises. Bouncing back a little bit.
I was just gonna say, for sure, like this league is a lot more even than you would think with most professional leagues. Like with, for example, football, for a while we had the Patriots were like the team to beat all the time, and we had the Browns, who were just like the Browns, having that winless season. But like this league is, anything can happen at any week. Falcons can go into Seattle and just thump on them. We just like it can happen. And
Absolutely.
and that's what I love about this is that, anything can happen at any time and there's no telling who's going to come out on top.
Yeah, absolutely. That being said, one trend that we have seen so far is a lot of home cooking, a lot of home field advantages. So for fans getting into it, supporting their teams in the first full season of the Western Ultimate League, it's been exciting to watch home teams. From what I can tell, gone 6-1 so far. The only loss at home being Arizona in their third game, or one of their 3 games on the weekend against Seattle. So doesn't necessarily bode well for San Francisco traveling to Seattle. You think it might help San Diego, maybe might help LA in the homestand. Of course, Utah Wild played that first weekend. We have not seen them since. We will see them this coming week playing against LA, but still TBD on a lot of these teams. And maybe the Wild having that homestand the very last weeks of the season is going to help give them a boost, help vault them into the Final Four.
Yeah. I think home field advantage is a real thing. It definitely gives, teams a little bit of an edge, having their fans there. But also, playing 3 games in a weekend is pretty tough. 3 hard fought games in a weekend. And I think that's kind of what happened with Arizona and how they fell to the Tempest. It was, yeah, it's tough. But yeah, we can definitely see the home field advantages of the thing. It's going to be difficult for every team, traveling in, being able to, pull the negative energy that the crowd is giving them into positive energy for their team.
Yeah.
Not saying that everybody's actually booing the other team, because we all love, watching Ultimate.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're definitely not exactly cheering for them,
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see. And again, not that many weeks of Ultimate left for the Western Ultimate League before we get to Championship Weekend. It'll be held in San Diego. So San Diego, similar to Winter Cup, with a bit of a home field advantage if they make Championship Weekend. So, Sascha, let's get on the records now. Let's be wrong in episode 1. Let's make our picks for who's going to make the final 4 teams in the Western Ultimate League. As far as we know, it is just going to be the top teams that end up making it to the final weekend. Tiebreaker, I would assume, is point differential, goal differential. Not sure if that remains tied, if there are other tiebreakers. You might have to just wait and see until week 8 to see how things shake out. So, Sascha, who do you think are going to be in San Diego for championship weekend?
Oh, it's tough. It's very, very, very hard to bet against Seattle. So that's definitely number 1 going into the weekend. From there, it's hard to say. I am going to go with, obviously, Utah Wild. Obviously, can't root against them. So we got Seattle, Utah. I'm really liking what I'm seeing out of this Oregon team, so I'm going to say Oregon. And the last one, we are going to go with. This is the one that's been eating me. I am torn between Arizona and San Diego. And I think I'm going to go with my gut and say Arizona. I'm predicting no California teams in the final weekend.
Wow. No California teams in the championship weekend of the Western Ultimate League held in San Diego. That was a bold prediction. I will say, I'm going to go with you on most. I agree. Seattle, feels like a sure bet at this point. Oregon, I feel pretty good that they will pick up at least one more win that would presumably, possibly get them in at least 3-3, if not a better record. Plus, wouldn't it be fun to have that Northwest showdown again, as usual, down in San Diego? I think it would be fun.
Oh,
I
yeah,
will
for
I
sure.
will go with your Utah Wild pick. They won at the Winter Cup, is a very talented team with the homestand towards the very end of the season in week 7. I think that actually does give them an advantage to close out the season strong and not give teams a chance to rebut basically and improve their records, while Utah can close it out at home. For my fourth team, similar to you, between Arizona and San Diego, I will go with San Diego. I think Arizona did well in their homestand. I think San Diego able to get that homestand for themselves as well, getting to play the Astra in San Diego still, I think gives enough of an advantage to San Diego that they will be able to pull it out over Arizona. Arizona having to go on the road from here on out, I think it's going to be tough for them to pick up enough points, enough wins in order to make it over the line. I think having those homestands end of the season, giving both San Diego and Utah the advantage. Between us, we have one California team making the championship weekend. 1 out of 8 teams between the two of us. For the listeners at home, let us know your thoughts. Chime in, let us know, add us on Twitter. Let us know your thoughts, and we'll see where we get by the time we get to championship weekend, finish out week 8, and see who does end up making it. Shifting to the Premier Ultimate League, let's do basically the same exercise, except the Premier Ultimate League has, of course, just barely started. So, few key things I know that I'm keeping an eye out for. The teams, that did not play in 2021. The vast majority of the teams in the Premier Ultimate League did play in 2021. But Minnesota Strike, Nashville Nightshade, and my brain has lost the other one, Atlanta Soul, who we just saw play, are returning after not playing in 2021, while the Monarchs, Milwaukee Monarchs, Medellin Revo Pro, and Raleigh Radiants are your championship winners from last season in the Midwest International and East Championships, respectively. Be interesting to see how all those teams end up faring throughout the season. From the initial results, Atlanta took season off, not looking so great week 1. Raleigh continues to show that they are indeed one of the best teams. Monarchs also picking up a win. 2 championship winners, first weekend picking up wins, looking good for those teams so far, but got a lot of games to play. A lot of the teams in the league still yet to play at all.
Yeah, it's definitely something we will be watching. I think I don't know. It's gonna be fun. It's always fun watching all these teams play. And I think that Minnesota, Nashville, and Atlanta are very excited to be back. They're excited to be back on the field, back playing some professional frisbee.
Yeah, I think it's good for the Premier Ultimate League to be back to having what they had intended for 2020-2021, the 12-team league. And also, we have heard that they are effectively separating into 3 separate divisions. So, in similar fashion to the championships, in the South Division, as it is potentially called, there's Raleigh, Nashville, Atlanta, and Austin. In the Midwest, Minnesota, Milwaukee, Indy, and Columbus are all matched up. And in the East, Revo Pro, New York Gridlock, Portland, Maine, Portland Rising, and DC Shadow are in the East. These divisions are from what we can tell, loose divisions. Not every team in the division plays every other team in the division. However, for championship weekend, which for the PUL, as we have heard so far, will be 4 teams. From what we have also heard, it will be the best team from each of those quote-unquote divisions making it to the final weekend in addition to the best second place team. The question is, Sascha, with these divisions kind of setting up as they are arguably 4 of the best 5 teams in the league, as we have been thinking of them in the same division, which means that arguably 2 of them, based on what we know so far, will be left out entirely out of championship weekend.
I mean, yeah, that's those, and I'm assuming we're talking about the East Division here with
the East
Revo
Division with the Gridlock, Revo,
yeah, and Portland and DC. Yeah, it's that's going to be a wild division to keep up with. Definitely the division to watch, and it's might come down to the very last game between 2 of those teams. Looking at the schedule, there is, let's see here.
Looks like in week 10, the Portland Rising are playing both DC Shadow and New York Gridlock. So that could be a determining factor there, depending on how Portland does against both DC and New York. We'll see if by that point Hero Pro has sealed up a spot for themselves, or if they haven't been able to put themselves in a good enough position by the time we get to week 10 to make it. It'll be interesting to see how that all shakes out. Interesting that the PUL is keeping it at 4 teams as of this time, with the effective winners of each of those divisions placing in, as well as the best second place finisher. So it'll be interesting to see how that all shakes out. I think when it comes to week 10, those Portland Rising games will be the ones to watch to figure out who exactly ends up making it. Well, we presume. We've been surprised so far by the Western Ultimate League. Who's to say we won't be surprised by the Premier Ultimate League the rest of the season?
Yeah, I'm excited. Again, I like in the Western Ultimate League. This league seems pretty level. There's not like one team that's the best team and one team that's the worst team. There's, it's kind of spread out throughout the whole league, and there's a lot that can happen, and it'll be fun. Especially with the East, and keeping up with Revo, because they have a tough schedule. Because coming from Colombia, they have to play a lot of games in a very short amount of time in order to maximize, their time here in the U.S. and, not try to spend a ton of money going back and forth between Colombia and the U.S.
Yeah, absolutely. So it'll be something interesting to watch as well when Revo Pro gets a chance to play. How do they do? They'll have some long road trips that they'll have to navigate in order to put on a good enough showing in order to make it to that championship weekend if it's set up as we think it might be. One other thing to talk about, and this is both for the Premier Ultimate League and the Western Ultimate League, is something we've seen initially so far in both seasons, is some issues with the broadcasts here and there. For the Western Ultimate League, the most notable example is in the Oregon Onyx's first home game. They're playing Providence Park, great big professional stadium, home to both the Major League Soccer and National Women's Soccer League teams in Portland, but also was filmed at an odd angle and things were too zoomed in. And some questions about, was it a stadium crew that was working the camera, or was it an Ultimate crew, or vice versa? Also some issues with name pronunciations and pronoun usage in that game as well from the local commentators. And then this past weekend, we have the Milwaukee and Columbus game live streamed, but not really commentary. And from what we've heard after the fact, the audio that folks heard in terms of names and announcements was the public address system being piped in. And the stream also had some other issues as well, cutting in and out at times. Sascha, this is something that has been talked about quite a bit of what should the expectations be for these leagues to put out a quality broadcast product, knowing that the organizations are largely volunteer run, that they're figuring things out on the fly. They're often working with outside organizations that are not necessarily Ultimate specific. What should we expect? What is the level of professionalism that we should expect from these leagues that are professional leagues? And is it just growing pains? And do we just need to give them a chance to get things figured out? We're in our very first episode. There's going to be some kinks that we're going to have to be working through. For our show, for their shows, for their broadcasts, you'd think it's probably the same. And it's professional sport product. It's entertainment that you're trying to show. What are the expectations that you think maybe we should be expecting or we shouldn't be expecting? What feels appropriate?
Yeah, I think that I'm chalking a lot of it up to growing pains. It happens. It was the first games of the season. Obviously, the next Portland game that we watched, against Arizona this past weekend, was an incredible broadcast. And I'm, hoping that the Pride are gonna, figure it out and try to be able to have a great broadcast with some commentators and stuff. But yeah, because to be completely honest, I couldn't watch it. There was no sound. I was really bored. I get distracted really easily, and I just couldn't watch it because there's no like real entertainment value for me as someone that needs all of those audio and visual stimulations to be able to enjoy it. So I'm hoping that they do figure it out. They're both professional leagues, and I guess we just need to have some professional, I guess not like super high professional level broadcasting, but we need to have, the audio of at least the field. And to be able to, hear, I enjoy hearing field sounds. I enjoy hearing, the players on the sidelines, and all the cheering and all that fun stuff. So yeah, I think, it's the first week of the season. We'll figure it out, hopefully, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, I think there's definitely, I think judging the leagues on their first few games, on the first interactions and the partnerships that they're having with outside organizations, I think it's probably too harsh to say, as I saw at least some folks on Twitter say that the PUL was letting down the players on the field because the players had worked so hard and the PUL couldn't put out a good enough product. And this again gets to a question I think we'll talk about pretty consistently on the show about what shows up for the teams, what falls under the team's purview and what falls under the league's purview, and how does that balance. I think when it comes to production, it often is done more on the team side than the league side. And so it's a question of what does that look like for the individual teams to have the resources and practice? Simple practice and experience doing it. A lot of folks will compare Ultimate broadcasts to Ulti-World broadcasts, which some of the productions, some of the broadcasts that we've seen from these leagues, including the Western Ultimate League's Winter Cup, was produced by Ulti-World people. So yes, we're an Ulti-World podcast talking about Ulti-World broadcasts. It's not all the same people, but it's a lot of the same people. And there has been a lot of work that's been put in by folks at Ulti-World and other Ultimate and Frisbee broadcasting organizations. Look at Fulcrum Media as well. Not as involved nowadays, but long-standing Ultimate media producer. It's going to take time. And it is okay, in my mind, that there are these hiccups. Yes, you want the more quality product. Yes, you want a better entertainment value, and it's going to take time and resources and practice, especially with what we've heard, not necessarily formally announced yet, but the Premier Ultimate League working with a group called Quad Media, which, from what I can tell, has come out of roller derby, women's flat track roller derby, as a production company that focuses on raising up and sharing more marginalized voices in sports. I think it's great that the PL is partnering with Quad Media, and it's going to take time as well for Quad Media and for any folks that the Western Ultimate League are working with to figure out all the details and what it's like to film and produce and broadcast an ultimate game in ways that maybe those folks haven't done yet, and maybe the teams themselves are also getting practice with and trying to figure out a little bit on the fly as things continue to change for the leagues.
Yeah, and on the note, Ultiworld has been around for over 10 years at this point. They've gained, enough things, I guess, enough equipment to be able to put out in practice, to be able to put out these incredible broadcasts that we see. And here we have, the PUL has been out for, only a few years, took a big break, and now we're trying to make them, we're trying to compare them to a company that's been out for, 3 times as long. We just gotta be patient. Now, if we're still seeing the same thing, week 4 or 5, then we have a bigger issue on our hands.
Yeah, especially by the later parts of the season as different teams host games as well. Next time Columbus hosts a game, you'd hope the product improves, but maybe the next time another team, say Nashville, hosts a game this upcoming weekend, there still might be growing pains, and that's going to be okay. Leagues aren't letting their players down. The teams certainly aren't intending to let their players down. They're doing the best they can with the resources and information that they have and the resources they have. And I think we as ultimate consumers are going to have to be okay with that. We want an ESPN level, an Ultiworld level of production, and that is a lot more behind the scenes work and effort and time and money than I think people often realize. And that just is going to take time and practice. And again, we're in episode 1, feels as apt a time as any to talk about this. We're going to have growing pains. The leagues are going to have growing pains. But the Ultimate is still great to watch. And from what we have also been hearing, that the PUL will be repackaging and releasing on tape delay, from my understanding, the Raleigh Atlanta game, and potentially repackaging to share out the Milwaukee and Columbus game. So we may get a different version, a hopefully better for broadcast entertainment value version of the Milwaukee and Columbus game. And hopefully that will just continue to improve for games in weeks to come. Moving to games in weeks to come, let's talk end of season predictions for the Premier Ultimate League. 4 teams. Again, the thought is that the top team out of each of those quote unquote divisions will make it into the championship weekend, as well as the top second place team. Sascha, week 1 in the books. What are your predictions for championship weekend? Who's going to make it?
All right. Well, let's see. In the South, we got Raleigh, Nashville, Atlanta, and Austin. That's pretty easy for me. It's Raleigh. Raleigh's definitely going through. In the Midwest, we have Minnesota, Milwaukee, Indy, and Columbus. And I'll say Milwaukee for that one. And then we get to the East. Oh boy. Okay. We've got Medellin Revo, which is an incredible team out of Colombia. They're amazing. I don't know what else more to say about it. Yeah, they're great. And then we have New York Gridlock, which is also a really good team. I think they have a lot of Bent players, correct? Bent is out of New York, correct? If I remember correctly.
Yeah,
Sounds right. Bent and they have some Brute Squad on their team too. That's I had the pleasure of playing with Jenny De Jesus recently, who is on this New York Gridlock team, and she is going to be a problem. She's very, very good. Then there's Portland. Haven't seen a whole lot of this Portland team. I've seen Matt Keston. Matt Keston's pretty cool. She came from she's playing for the Utah Wild last season. Really drove their offense and helped them out a lot. And I believe she can do it again. She's a very, very good handler. Smart too, and has great field awareness for the Portland Rising being able to do that. And the last team is DC. Oh boy. This DC team has
a lot of filibustering there.
I know. I'm thinking so hard. I'm sorry. Let's see. DC has a lot of the Pittsburgh players. Who? A lot of Pittsburgh players who are yes. Wow. I'm gonna go with
Gotta make a decision.
DC it is. We're doing Raleigh, Milwaukee, DC. That's the 3 divisions, right?
And yep.
Wait, did I miss one?
That's your 3. Who's your 4th?
Okay. And what did I miss?
You need a second place team.
A second place team. Oh, out of like overall?
Best second place team to make it in.
The best second place team to... Okay. Best second place team to make it in will be Revo.
Okay. Raleigh, Revo Pro, Milwaukee, and DC are Sascha Vogel's choices for the Premier Ultimate League Championship weekend. I will go Raleigh as well. I will also go Milwaukee out of the South and the Midwest. And then I will go DC. DC, a lot of good pickups this year, including Cami Groom and Annalise Peters to DC Shadow, which are 2 incredible pickups out of the Boston area and Pittsburgh area. And then I will actually go Columbus. I think Columbus has shown that they can hang with Milwaukee, and I think that they will have the horses to hang with a lot of the other teams. I think we'll have a slightly softer schedule being in the Midwest, and that might give an advantage over an East Division that might gobble each other up and lead to Columbus looking as the best second place team, able to escape the carnage that may be the East Division. So we'll see. So my end, I match you for 3, and then I will take Columbus for my 4th team. That does it for end of season predictions. Let's do some quick picks for the upcoming weekend games. We have 3 games across the 2 leagues, 1 in the Western Ultimate League and 2 in the Premier Ultimate League. In the Western Ultimate League, we have the Utah Wild playing at LA Astra, and in the PUL, we have Indy Red playing at the Nashville Nightshade, and the Raleigh Radiants playing at DC Shadow. What are our picks?
You go first
Sascha.
This time.
I go first. All right. I'll go first this time. I think even though the home team has had the advantage overall in the Western Ultimate League, I will go with the Utah Wild, making the trip down to Southern California for the San Diego, Southern California, LA swing. I think they will start it off with a win in LA. I will take the Wild. In the PUL, Indy playing Nashville. Two teams, I think, that maybe are a bit under the radar. Nashville taking 2021 off. I will take Nashville with the win in week 2, their first game in quite some time. In particular, Jesse Schaffner, recently named as an alternate to the World Games team, is on the Nightshades roster. I think a high usage, high impact player like Schaffner can really make an impact for Nashville in their opening game. And in the Radiant Shadow game, which should be an absolute barn burner, I think I'm going to take the Radiants. Just so good out of North Carolina, and adding Sarah Mexstroth does nothing but good. Yes, the Shadow have a lot of talent, but I'm going to take the Radiants in this one. Sascha.
All right. I feel like I'm obligated to disagree, but I agree with every single one of those. I think the Wild are going to win.
Fair enough.
Go Wild. I think that Nightshade will pull off the win. They have a lot of this Nashville Shine roster on their team. The mixed team. Sorry, I couldn't think of the word. The mixed team that went to nationals and made some noise. They looked pretty good. So Shine. And what was the last one? The Radiance.
Last game is Radiance versus Shadow.
Yeah, I think the Radiance are. I think it's going to be a very close game, but I think the Radiance pulls it out. Notably, there are. I can't remember who said it on Twitter that I saw, but they said that there are 4 of the 10 women from the World Games roster and alternates playing in this Shadow Radiance game. And so it's going to be pretty good. And, a lot of other players that honestly maybe could have made world in another year or, can make it in the future. There's a lot of talent on both of those teams. It's going to be fun.
Yeah. Should be a fun one to watch. That will do us in our very first episode of Double Overtime. Thank you so much for joining us as we talk through the games that happen, the games that will be coming for the Western Ultimate League and the Premier Ultimate League. Please, if you are a subscriber or if you want to hear more of us, become a subscriber. We'll have a subscriber-only bonus segment first week. We're going to talk some jerseys, give a little quick tier list ranking of both leagues' jerseys, and check it out if you're a subscriber. And if you're not, WUL.com/subscribe. Join in the fun. Give your thoughts on the league jerseys. And we'll be back next week, week 2, episode 2. Let us know your thoughts. Hit us up on Twitter, on social media. Reach out. Double Overtime Podcast. I'm Jenna Weiner. He's Sascha Vogel. Thanks so much.